בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב. Thank you for joining us. ברוכים הבאים to Josh and Tamsin. And we want to learn today, and I do hope to be able to cover this topic, cover this great figure in one shiur, but it may happen that you need another. We'll see. So we want today to speak about Rav Aharon Kotler, one of the most important Torah figures of the 20th century, and a man that in many ways is responsible for the shaping of the Haredi Jewish world in the United States, but he has also a great influence on Haredi and on the Jewish world also here in Israel and in other places as well. So who is Rav Aharon Kotler? Rav Aharon Kotler was not born as a Kotler. He was born as a Pines. Rav Aharon Pines, not Rav, but called, he was born as Arale Pines in a place which I would pronounce as Swiss Loch. That is nowadays Belarus, and that is 1892. 1892 he was born, and his father was Reb Shneur Zalman Pines, was a Chabad Chassid. Very interesting. He was a Chabad Chassid, the Rav of the place. And he later adopted the son and the last name Kotler in order to evade recruiting to the army of Russia, as was the minhag back then. In my father's family also, they have the same thing. So people needed to adopt a different last name because the rule was that the Bechor, the firstborn to each family, is exempt. And so you wanted all of your children to be firstborns. So each one would be of a different family, and that's how people became to be different last name, although they were the same family. So he became a Kotler. Unfortunately, at the age of 10, almost at the same year, he lost both of his parents. He was orphaned. So that is the age of 10. And he was adopted by his uncle, who was a mitnaged, who opposed Hasidism, and he didn't really return to Chabad later in life. He became actually became one of the prominent figures in the Lithuanian mitnaged world. So that also happened. Sometimes it's transformed from mitnagdim, from Lithuanians into Hasidim, but sometimes also it goes the other way around. And so that was at the age of 10. Now, as you can imagine, such we would call today a trauma, right? Being orphaned of both your parents at the same year, at a very early age of 10. So it seems that for a couple of years, and here the stories are very murky, so I'm just giving you the best speculation that I understand from the sources, from my limited knowledge and reading. So it seems that for a couple of years, he had some internal struggle regarding where does he want to head. Meaning, as I said, his father was a Rav, so he came from a rabbinical family, and he had also some of his uncles and great uncles were Rabbanim in different places, so an important Torah family. However, as happened back then, we begin speaking about the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, so that is the great tide of secularism in Eastern Europe, and he is growing up. He's the age of 10. He lost both his parents, and there are different wings in the Jewish street, and he is trying to understand where does he want to be heading. Obviously, he had a great talent, that is clear, and he met with Zionists, religious Zionists, secular Zionists, people of the Haskalah movement, meaning people that were trying to secularize him and bent him towards more what we would call today academic learning. He has a sister that became a very talented mathematician. Yeah, I struggle both with the word and the content. So, she went into math. Obviously, she also had a great talent, and she went into math. And she also tried to convince him to come with her to the world of mathematics. We know that he was playing chess against different. So again, he was a child of 10 years old. It's not so irregular, but when we speak usually about the word of Gdolei Torah, that is something that is special. So he was playing chess against different people in his city. However, at the age of 13, it seems through a chess game, he came under the influence of a certain Rev Reuven Grozovsky, who became also a great rabbinical figure. And Rab Reuven understood that he stands in front of a great mind, a one in a generation mind. And he influenced young Aaron to go into the great Knesset Israel Yeshiva of Slobodka, a very famous yeshiva in Slobodka. Later became the Hebron Yeshiva. And he comes there at the young age of 13. Now, he's not the only one coming at the age of 13. Back then, there was no high school for boys. So many boys would go to the great yeshivot as their high school years, especially someone who is orphan and anyhow, he's looking for a place to belong to. So he's going to Knesset Israel, to Slobodka, and he learns there by the altar of Slobodka, Reb Natan Tzvi Finkel. And he comes in, at the beginning he joins the youth shiur, right, for his own age group, but immediately after a couple of days, the Rebbe of the youth group understands that he speaks to someone that needs to be immediately uplifted. So he is being sent into the highest shiur of the yeshiva, taught by the alter himself. And the alter said, actually they say, as you know, 50% of what I'm saying is hagiography. So I'm taking it and I'm trying to understand what was really said, or at least what is well-deserved to be said. So they say that the alter once expressed himself that it is worth to hold all of the students of the yeshiva, even if it was only for giving the suitable environment for the growth of Arale Swisslocher, meaning Arale from Swissloch, that is would be later be known as Rav Aharon Kotler. Now they say again, I don't know if that is correct, but it seems to be said in many sources that the alter would censor letters that would come for him. So his sister would send him letters trying maybe to convince him to leave the yeshiva because what he's doing there is just a waste of time and that's something old. We don't do it anymore. It's primitive. So abandon the yeshiva. And the alter censored the letters. He didn't give him to him until some years later when he felt that Rav Aharon is already bound in place, and only then he gave him the letter sent by the sister. Now, again, I guess that nowadays we would approach it differently, but we have to understand that what we would call today Orthodox Judaism, obviously it was not called back then Orthodox Judaism, but Orthodox Judaism was fighting for its life. And many people, good people, great minds, were leaving the field, not only to become secular Zionists, they were completely abandoning the Jewish world, as happens today also in the States. But today, the Rabbanim has zero influence on the youth leaving the field because they don't go to yeshivot anymore. The different camps became so separated that the influence of the Haredi world is very strong in itself. But what is the influence of the Haredi world on the Jewish young boy or girl that live just a street nearby? Almost zero. So today you cannot censor the letters anymore. But back then the feeling was that you have to stop the bleeding with any means necessary. And that's I guess that's the type of methods or means they had to use. So at the age of, he's learning there in Slobodka, obviously again a great mind, learning all day and all night. He's a great matmid. I'm in this shiurim, I try to the best of my ability to speak about what is special about every gadol that we speak about. So we can understand that if we speak here about him, then he is a genius and he's learning all day and all night. And he's a matmid, and he's dedicated to Torah, and he does nothing else. No more chess for him, etc., etc., etc. No more Pushkin. So only Torah learning. Fine, beautiful. at 1914, when he is 22, which was young to the time in Lithuanian yeshiva. Maybe nowadays, again, in the Haredi world, 22 is an old bachur. But back then, people were getting married later at life. So 22 was considered pretty young. At the age of 22, he marries Hannah Pearl, who is the daughter of one of the great people of the generation. We spoke about him in some shiur last year, called Reb Iser Zalman Meltzer, a very important Lithuanian rabbi that later made Aliyah, as we would speak about, to Eretz Israel. So he marries his daughter, and Reb Iser Zalman Meltzer, who is the head of the yeshiva, is the Rosh Yeshiva of Etz Chaim in Slotsk. It's another city nowadays, Belarus. And it's very important. It's not as important as Slobodka, but it's also a renowned, famous yeshiva. And he joins him to become a teacher, a rabbi, in his yeshiva in Slotsk. However, if you remember your general history courses, then if we speak about 1914, we speak about Communist Party and the Bolsheviks taking a hold of first of Russia, and then they begin to encroach into the rest of Eastern Europe, and lives become more and more difficult for yeshiva and for Torah learning. So in 1921, after 7 years in Slotsk, Rabbi Iser Zalman tells his son-in-law, look, we cannot remain here anymore. I need to stay here because I'm not only the head of the yeshiva, I'm also the Rav of the community, of the local community. I must stay with them. But you should go over and go to Klatsk. So from Slotsk to Klatsk. Now to us, all of these places seems the same. And if you'd go today, they are basically the same. All of them are, I mean, the Belaruses would forgive me, but all of them are God-forgotten places I mean, it's nothing with nothing. However, back then, there was a border. Nowadays, it's all part of the area called Minsk in Belarus. But back then, Klatsk was part of the Polish New Republic. So that's extremely important because you may be surprised to know that between the wars, between First World War and Second World War, Poland was a very democratic place. Now, it was extremely anti-Semitic, but it was a democratic place. You can be democratic and anti-Semitic, you wouldn't be surprised. And I don't want to give examples, but Poland was worse. Poland was worse. But you had Jewish rabbis in the Polish parliament because it was a democracy. And so you could have, at least formally, you could have a yeshiva. So again, it may be that some thugs would go in and make a little pogrom or something. But basically, formally, according to the law, everything was lawful. And in Belarus, as the Bolsheviks were making their own laws, it was becoming harder and harder just lawfully to hold to a big yeshiva. So Rav Aharon leaves the yeshiva in Slotsk with a big chunk of the students' body, and they cross the border illegally into Poland and re-establish the yeshiva in Klatsk. In 1924, 3 years later, he becomes the head of the yeshiva in Klatsk. Now he's still they are like a branch of the yeshiva in Slotsk. But you can understand that basically in the day-to-day life, he's the Rosh Yeshiva. And having Rosh Yeshiva in a different country, and you have no internet and no emails. So obviously he was basically running the yeshiva in all educational or administration aspects. So he's the head of the yeshiva. He's very young, but he's becoming very famous because he is a giant. He's a giant in Torah. He's also very stark in his perceptions. As it happens, I think, many times, if someone had internal struggles as a young guy and then he came to a decision, he's very hard in his decision. I think that happens sometimes, that someone that grew up and he doesn't feel threatened by other ways of life, then he's able sometimes to be more later in life, he is more open to them in a sense. Or at least he is not as harsh and hostile. But because Rav Kotler understood the danger in the other Jewish choices, right, that were open camps, then the secular and the Zionist, he became a very hardliner. That's very important to understand to the rest of his life. He was a hardliner ideologically. And he also understood another very important thing, which in Lithuania was known, but he was able to formulate it, and that is the importance of yeshivot for the continuity of Jewish life in the modern world. Now, what I just said seems to be a truism. That's very simple. Of course, without yeshivot, you cannot have Jewish life in modern world. But we have to understand it is not so simple. Many Jews just believed that just as in the 17th century or the 16th century, a very few minority went to yeshivot. And most of the Jews, you grew up in a Jewish home, you learned from your parents, and you were a Jew. You're an extremely good Jew. What's the problem is? So people would think that if they would have a Jewish household, obviously their children would remain on the path. Now, obviously, it was not happening anymore. We can discuss the reasons in previous shurim. We did spoke about, so I cannot right now go into that in depth. But things were changing dramatically and fast. It was not enough to have a Jewish household. Just as we now understand, it's very clear to us that it would be very difficult if you are holding to a Jewish, just the bare minimum of Jewish household, just doing the mitzvot, but barely know to learn and having no intellectual understanding of Judaism, just the pragmatic, how do you do the mitzvot, what is called sometimes mimetic Judaism. You see, you do. It doesn't fly anymore. Modern people with modern education, they want to understand what they do, at least in a minimal level. And we operate our mind much more, most of us operate our minds much more than we operate our hands. That's in contradiction to earlier eras in human life in which people worked with their hands and their feet, and it was completely understandable to them that they don't understand many things, and also they don't understand the mitzvot. It's fine. But nowadays, we are used to understanding and to demand understanding. And it's very difficult to hold to a tradition that you completely, it's a black box. I mean, obviously, all of us can understand that there may be some areas that are of higher and you need to learn more, and maybe some things belong to Hashem and we could not understand. All of that is good and fine. But you want to give a basic, what I'm doing now, right? We understand the Jewish education, intellectual education, is not an excess. It's not something that is a luxury. It's a nice to have. It's the backbone of our ability to continue Jewish existence. And that is something that Rav Aharon Kotler understands very, very well. And that's why he establishes the Vad HaYeshivot. He's not the only one there. Obviously, it's a group of Rabbanim, but he is the living spirit behind the Vad HaYeshivot, which was established in order to help to organize, open new yeshivot and help the old yeshivot finance themselves, which obviously always was the difficult thing. And he's extremely young. All the other Rabbanim in Vad HaYeshivot are old, esteemed, older in almost a full generation. But he is active, again, and he's renowned and famous for his abilities and genius. In 1925, Rav Meltzer has no other choice. He is being targeted by the communists. That's the father-in-law, you remember? He has to make aliyah. He makes aliyah to Eretz Israel, where he becomes the head of Etz HaChaim in Yerushalayim. And he's becoming one of the Gdolei Yerushalayim, an extremely important Rebbe. Again, I refer you to the shiur we gave a year ago about Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer. I would just mention that Rav Yisrael Zalman Meltzer was less hostile to Zionism, and he was not, don't get it wrong, he was a Haredi, but he was less hostile. So, for example, his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Meltzer, was the head of Yeshivat HaDarom in Rehovot, and his Rav Tzvi Yehuda's Meltzer daughter, which was called Miriam, would marry Rav Yehuda Amital, was the head of one of my rabbis, my Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshivat Har Etzion, and Rav Yehuda Amital, together with his father-in-law, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Meltzer, would establish the Hesder program for guys to both learn yeshiva and serve in the army. Now that's very, very far removed from Rav Aharon Kotler's word, but just understand. So they were both heading the yeshiva in Slotsk and Klatsk, but there were differences between them. So one made his way to Eretz Israel, and now we continue with the son-in-law, with Rav Aharon Kotler himself. So Rav Aharon Kotler now is one of the prominent Rashi Yeshiva between the wars in Poland and Lithuania, extremely important. In retrospective, we can say that his role in Kalsk, in the yeshiva in Kalsk, was like a preparation for what you do later in a much larger scale in the United States. That is establishing the word of Torah, establishing the word of yeshiva. He also joined and is heading Agudat Israel. He is establishing a branch of Agudat Israel. Agudat Israel is the political party which would become the Haredi political, meaning it was established as the Haredi political party. Now, in a way, it's a paradox. Agudat Israel, again, we spoke about it in the past, but there is some paradox in the foundation of Agudat Israel. You can hear by the name. What is Agudah? Agudah means that they are the klal, right? They are the general of Am Israel, but they are a political party. So are they a party, a group, or are they the whole? So the answer is they believe that they are the whole because they represent the true Jewish identity. Non-Torah is a non-Jewish identity. They may be Jews by birth, but they do not act as Jews. So the Agudat Israel is a party in this strange world, but they are really the representative of the true Am Israel. So that's how they navigate. And Rav Aharon Kotler is a main ideologist of the movement I just described, obviously in very, very, very basic and general lines. Okay. In 1935, 1936, as many other Rashi Yeshiva, he understands that if he wants to get money, raise funds, he needs to go outside of Eastern Europe because the economic situation in Eastern Europe does not lend himself to be able to finance and support so many Torah institutions. So he is making a journey. He goes to England, and then he continues and crosses the ocean to the Golden Medina or the Treif Medina or both at the same time. That is to the United States. He went there for 11 months. So that's a long time, but he wanted to go throughout all of the Jewish big communities and to raise funds. He is able to raise some money. He also is able to make friends. That would become obviously very important in the future. And he returns to Europe. Now, as I said, he's a hardliner. And we have testimonials that people came to him and asked for advice. Should we go to the United States? Because of economic situation, but also because anti-Semitism in the later years of the 30s. So people begin to understand that we are not heading necessarily towards a good future. So they go and ask him, should we immigrate to the United States? And he answers no. Stay in Europe because the United States, I was there, and there is no Judaism there. Why? Because there are no yeshivot. Now, there were some yeshivot, but he was not happy with them. Torah Vadat in Brooklyn and others, but they were combining secular studies with Torah. And for him, yeshiva is only one thing. Nar Torah. Only Torah, Torah, Torah. That's yeshiva. Anything else is very nice, maybe needed, but not a yeshiva. And there is no Jewish continuity without yeshiva. And so he says to people, do not emigrate, do not go to the United States. Regarding Israel, he was, I guess, more in a struggle because he had his father-in-law that went into Eretz Israel. But it's obviously that if someone was able to stay in the yeshiva in Europe, then that's the goal. Stay in the yeshiva.
What year?
So we are in the later years of the 30s, 1930s, the later years.
Did you see any trouble coming
They saw, but he also saw First World War. So he understood that there would be some pogroms. It would be difficult. It would be tragic. But yeah, but they didn't see, as many others. I don't blame him for that. My own family also didn't see that, and they were murdered. So they didn't see what is coming. Obviously, if he would have known, he would have acted differently. But Maybe, yeah, maybe they hoped they were more fearful. That's also very important to understand. They feared the communists more than they feared the Germans. We also have to remember that in the First World War, the Germans treated the Jews much better than the Russians. So people even thought that maybe, yeah, Germany, okay, they speak harshly, but okay, how they say, a dog that bark does not bite. So they're the Germans, after all. They're very polite. They're very cultured. Meaning things. It would be in the end. People would suffer, no question. Maybe some chas v'chaila would be killed. That's very bad. But that is no different than the last 1500 years, right? So okay, we'll continue. I think that was basically the thought. And then Second World War breaks, right? So in September of 39, the Germans invade Poland from the west, and we have to remember that the Russians also begin to advance from the east, and there was a pact between Germany and the USSR. The Russians nowadays does not, they only like to speak about from 41 and on. They don't like to speak about 39 to 41. But they had a pact with Hitler, as I think we all know. And so Germany occupies the west side of Poland. The eastern side of Poland and Belarus and all this area is not being conquered by Germany. But the Russians they didn't do a great war as the Germans, but they were beginning also slowly to bite from Eastern Europe because there was a secret clause to the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement, a secret adamant, which said that they split Europe between them. Not only the peace was well known, that was published, but the hidden pact was that we split Europe between us. So you are allowed to conquer to this line, and then we are allowed to conquer to the other line. So the Soviets begin slowly but surely to bite into the Eastern European states. Now, again, for the Rashi Yeshivot, they are not worried about the Germans. That's something that, again, for us, looking at retrospective, it's very easy to forget. Because there was peace between the Russians and the Germans. So there was no reason to be afraid from the Germans because they would not attack. They are in peace with Stalin. So what we have to worry is not the Germans, but Stalin. So what they do, and again, we would see it nowadays and of course it was a mistake in hindsight, but they were running from the east to the west because they were running away from Stalin. They didn't want to cross into the German area, but they wanted to find places like Lithuania, which were independent, and you could lead independent Jewish life there. And so almost all of the yeshivot are running away from Soviet-controlled areas into Lithuania, into Vilna, and the areas of Vilna. However, there is no food, there is no money, and supply lines are very scarce because there is a war now, and it becomes more and more difficult. At a certain point, Rav Aharon Kotler decides that he would go to the United States again because he knows he has connections there, and from there he will try to support his students in Kalsk and try to bring as many of them as he can also into the United States, or at least away from Lithuania. Now, again, they are not, it's very difficult for us to understand. There is no Holocaust in their mind. They don't know about the Holocaust. Again, my great-grandfather in Hungary, he didn't know about the Holocaust in 44. And we're speaking about the 40s. So there are no gas chambers yet. 1,000,000 Jews already are being murdered, 1.5 million, but no one knows. So he's running away. He's running through Japan. So he's running to the east through Japan, and still there's before Pearl Harbor. So you can still go from Japan, from Kobe in Japan. You can go to San Francisco, where he lands after many adventures in 1941, in April of 9. Now the dates here are very important. April 1941. 1941, Erev Pesach. He comes to San Francisco. Now they say, again, it's a story, but in the story, they say that he was debating with himself when he was in Japan, should he continue to Eretz Israel or should he go to the United States? And he made a Gora Lagra. So there was a special Tanakh that he used, and he came upon the pasuk, Vayomer Hashem el Aharon, lech likrat Moshe hamidbara. So he understood, Vayomer Hashem el Aharon, is Aharon Kotler, lech likrat Moshe, Reb Moshe Feinstein, hamidbara, the United States is a desert in terms of Torah. So he understood this pasuk to mean that he should go to the United States. With him, also a handful of students. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, and he had a boy and a girl. A boy and a girl. And that's how he, on 1941, April 1941, he comes to San Francisco because he had connections. So a few Jews coming to accept him at the port, and immediately as he lands, he began to speak about saving his students. And they say that the next night, now people are speaking, so he also was speaking. But in the next night, he called the people that were there. He asked, what did you do yesterday after I spoke about saving my students? Now again, he didn't think about saving them from the Nazis. Mm-hmm. He was thinking about saving them from the communists. However, as we know, in the 22nd of June, 1941, the Germans surprised attack the USSR. And that obviously changed everything. Now, they were not ready to that. I mean, Stalin himself was not ready to that. So how can you blame the Jews for not having the intelligence to understand what is coming? And I mean, again, I don't need to describe here what happens as the Germans are conquering huge swaths of land and just moving in the blitzkrieg more and more into the east, and millions of Jews are falling into their hands. And again, that's before gas chambers. That's what is called the Holocaust by bullets. And they just enter a village after village, and they round the Jews, and they murdered everyone. Everyone. Babi Yar and other places, many other places, like Europe is full of Jewish blood. And they go on. Later, they just understood it's not as Yael, right? It's not as efficient as the German spirit demands. It's too wasteful, wasting so many bullets. The gas chambers were chosen because of their efficiency. That's all. And they march on, and Rav Kotler understands something. They begin to understand something terrible is happening. But he is in the United States. What can he do? He is doing his best. He is part of the Vada Hatzala, the board for rescue, the board for rescue. And he is running here and there, doing everything he can. But as you know, it was very difficult to convey the Americans to do anything. Only after Pearl Harbor, they even joined the war. And even after they joined the war, as you know, even the smallest action of bombing the railroads to Auschwitz, which they very well knew what is going on there, Roosevelt refused to do. Now, why? That's beyond my, it's beyond my understanding and beyond this sheer scope. But as you can understand, Rav Kotler was devastated. I think that he went to the Lower Eastern Side at that time. I mean, yeah, I don't think that San Francisco was such a great Jewish base. So yeah, so I think he just landed because when you came from Japan, you came to San Francisco. So I think he moved to the east. He moved to the east. He did the best that he could. But it was just larger than one man's action, or even many people's actions. And as many others, he had accusations towards the Jews, the American-born Jews, that maybe they were able, maybe they would have been able to do more. Again, it's beyond my knowledge or expertise. But I know that many people thought that the American Jews felt that if they would stand too proudly for other Jews, they would be blamed in being maybe having a double Yeah, and that's well, loyalty, exactly. Thank you. Double loyalty, and so that stopped them from completely standing down and trying to. I think the treasury minister was a Jew at the time, and he tried to speak with him, and the treasury ministry told Rav Kotler that he told him, if I would try to intervene in the war effort, it's not my place. They would fire me. Rav Kotler told him that saving one Jewish child is worth more than his position. And Irvin Bunim was a very important, also a very important functioner in the Jewish Orthodox community. He was the translator because Rav Kotler only spoke Yiddish, and this finance minister only spoke English. So he was the interlocutor, and he refused to translate this sentence. But this finance minister saw that Rav Kotler is very excited, so he asked it to be translated anyway. All of that, these are fine stories, and obviously Rav Kotler did everything that he was able to. And again, you have to remember that when he left, he couldn't know that he is in fact, abandoning his students to the Nazis. I'm sure that he would not have been leaving them if he would have known, but he didn't know. He thought that it's the communists, it's difficult, but maybe he would be able to extract them. And that's it completely fell apart. Yeah, of course.
Right, but when did where was the near yeshiva, and when did they decide to go to Shanghai?
Also, they were.
Why did they go?
Yeah, they go. They were because the heads of the yeshiva understood that it's better for them to begin to travel. Many yeshivot remain in Lithuania because again, Lithuania was independent, and they were allies with the Nazis. So the hope was that the Nazis would not would not conquer them. But this also fell apart. So people that were in Lithuania believed that maybe they would be saved. So again, in Second World War, you can say luck, you can say fate, you can say Hashem, but the question of where have you been at a certain time, that is the most important, crucial factor of the question, would you survive or not? A certain 20 kilometers in Romania from one place to the other was many times the question of would you survive or not, or in Lithuania, or in other places, or in Estonia. So there were two cities, as I say today, Klatsken, Slatsken, all of these places, these are, who knows, and there are holes. And they're in the same area, in the same region, and no one cares. But back then, the question, are you in Slatsko could be a question of life and death for many, many people. So that's, they just have been, you can say, smart enough to understand they need to extract all of those students immediately. And also it was brave to take everyone on a journey. Who knows what would happen? Always when you are heads of such a big body, then if you can stay where you are, it seems as the most safe thing to do, because in a journey, who knows what would happen? It's very complicated. It's very complicated. I think we of course we shouldn't be judgmental to no one there. He met with, these are the stories. There was a guy, an Italian guy, a non-Jew, called Joe Bonanno. He was the head of the mafia. And Rav Kotler went to meet him because he believed that he would be able to save some Jews in Italy if he would meet him, because this Bonanno obviously had connections. And he was able to save 24 Jews by his connections with this Bonanno. And he gave him a bracha. The bracha was that he would live a long life and die on his bed. And for a head of a mafia, die on your bed, that's meaning in this line of work, that's a special bracha. And indeed, it materialized. This Joe Bonanno died on his deathbed. And again, they say, I'm telling you the story as I read them, they said that the children of Joe Bonanno, which obviously continued the legacy of the great father, so they went to ask for a bracha from Reb Shneor Kotler, the son of Rav Aharon Kotler, and he also gave them the bracha on the state of being the children of this, I don't know, Hasidu Mota Olam, it's difficult to say. I don't know how many blood was on his hands, but he saved 24 Jews. So that's an interesting story. But again, unfortunately, all of these are nice stories, but you understand, it's not even a drop in the bucket. 24 Jews here, and maybe everyone is a word of himself. But when you speak about 6 millions, and Rav Kotler was not even able to save the majority of his own students from Karsk. That's okay. So that's 1940, 1941, 1942, and the war continues. But Rav Kotler understands that the word of Torah was in Europe is done, is demolished. That is clear, and is not going to be rebuilt in any near foreseen future. So now he begins to ask himself, how do I make sure that the Torah word would continue here in the golden Treife Medina, in this place in which people seem to care only about their paychecks? I apologize for those of you of American origin, but that's how he saw that. Extremely materialistic place, extremely. Even when they came to their spiritual life, so they build their temples in the most glorious way. But the Beit Midrash, learning, intellectual, that was very far from the American spirit. The American spirit is pragmatic. I think it's positive, but that's also, it's negative. And the Jews of America were extremely Americanized. By ideal, they were Americanized. And other rabbis try to speak to the generation. They try to adapt to the American way in order to cater to them. And Rav Kotler was very unique in saying, I'm not going to adapt to anything. He's a hardliner, remember. He said, I am going to make a copy-paste of my yeshiva in Karsk. The same thing would be established here in the United States. Now, that is as trying to sell today a dial phone, right, to people with smartphones. When you are coming with these arcane ideas of the 19th century to the most hustling and bustling and modern place in the world, to New York, and you are trying to sell them this yeshiva in which, and he was not shy of anything. He didn't say, I would produce rabbis that would help the community. No, he said, people would stay here and learn forever. If someone would not be able to continue to learn, maybe you'd go be a rabbi. But the ideal is staying and learning forever. That's as far removed from the American mindset and the Jewish American mindset as can be. People thought he's, for sure, is set for failure. However, he was a giant. He was a giant of spirit, he was a giant of Torah, he was a giant of faith. And he said, I cannot contribute, I cannot guarantee for the results, but I must do what I can. And in 1943, so there was a small yeshiva in a place called White Plains. And this yeshiva, for different reasons, failed, and financial problems and others. And then they asked Rav Kotler, the great genius, to come in and head this yeshiva and save it and also begin to raise it. And he decides that he would go there, and as I said, he would make it a Lithuanian yeshiva per se. He's coming in, he's moving them from the White Plains into Lakewood, New Jersey, and he begins the yeshiva with 13 students. 13 students. Obviously, it chose Lakewood because it was a resort city, it was a quiet place, it was not no, he removed himself also from the Orthodox hubs of New York. There were Orthodox hubs in New York, but Lower East Side, right? Rav Moshe Feinstein said in the Lower East Side, he decided to remove himself because he is building something new. And he was sharply criticizing almost everyone to his left, which includes basically in America, everyone. And he was, again, he was not shy. He was very direct and clear. He was honorable, but he was very direct and clear. He said, Reform and conservative are obviously, they are ziyuf Torah, right? They are ziyuf, right? Mezayef. Not even misapplying. It's a counterfeit. It's a counterfeit of the Torah. Counterfeit. Counterfake. Okay, yeah, it's fake. Yeah, it's counterfeit. It's a fake. He said, he would not cooperate in anything with them. He decided that you are not allowed. That happened later, but that was his line from the beginning that no connection. There were roof boards in which Orthodox, conservatives, and reforms were sitting together, such as I think it was the Synagogue Council of New York. He worked for them. So he made a ban. That was in the 50s. But yeah. Yeah, but he made a ban against them, and that caused many of the Haredi Rabbanim to remove themselves from this type of organizations. When we speak Be'ezrat Hashem on Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, I hope to, because he was the main opponent of the ban, so I hope to speak Be'ezrat Hashem more about this polemic. He was not a Hasidic anymore. As I said, he was born to a...
They're not just about visions.
It was not part of his agenda. It was not on his agenda. He respected the Satmar Rebbe. He respected the Satmar Rebbe, although, as I would explain in a minute, he had a different view than the Satmar Rebbe, but in many things their point of view were shared. Mm-hmm.
You said in Colorado, I was just put on the wall.
Yeah, so that he said, very interesting. He said, because maybe I have a shir on her also, Rebbetzin Kaplan. He said, without Rebbetzin Kaplan, who established the Beis Yaakov in the United States, in New York, he said, I would not have been able, because if you don't have girls that want to marry an Avrech, then there is no way that would fly. So yes, it was on the wife, it was on the parents, and people lived very meagerly. That is before Social Security. Nowadays, I think in Lakewood alone, they get $10 million. If I read when I prepared this show, I think they have $10 million from, I'm not sure if from the federal or from New York State. New Jersey, excuse me, from New Jersey State as grants for the students because of their because I mean nowadays they're registered as a college. That's things formally changed, but the yeshiva is the yeshiva. It's very interesting. If you go into they have an online site. They have a curriculum. You can have a bachelor degree. You can have a second degree. But obviously, people just go in and sit in yeshiva. It's a yeshiva. But they have all of this
but they
form.
They're deceiving.
I'm not sure. Maybe there are courses. They are registered as courses, but it looks like a yeshiva in yeshiva, not like an academy. I don't know what exactly did. I mean, I've never been there. Yeah, for sure.
How did him and his students dress?
The American students.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we have to understand that immediately after it began in 1943. In 1945, millions of Jews came to the United States from Eastern Europe. That's also something that is important here. So many Orthodox Jews came in. He laid the infrastructure, but he had who to speak with. Nowadays, I think they teach in their type of English there in Lakewood. I'm sure that in the first years they were teaching in Yiddish. Nowadays, that's what's called yeshivish or yeshiv English. No, these are not Stramers. These are Lithuanians. Yeah, these are Lithuanians. But they're Haredim. Black hats.
What makes them Lithuanian if they're from anywhere?
Lithuanian is a mindset. It's the mindset that Torah is the backbone of Jewish life. So you don't have a Rebbe, you don't have a Hasidikot, you don't have Tishim. I mean, you can have, but it is not considered as a very important thing. It's a nice thing to have. While in the Hasidic way of seeing things, Torah learning is only one more aspect of it's important. It's one more aspect of Jewish life. And you can be in the Hasidic world if you are connected to the Rebbe and you are doing mitzvot and you have kavana and you have beautiful tefillah. That's as well as someone who is a Jungelite in a koile. In the Lithuanian world, there is Torah and then there is everything else. That's a very thank you. It's a very important question. Okay, so he is, as I said, he established the yeshiva. And in the first years, they are very, very, very small constitution of students. He is completely opposed to any secular learning, to any cooperation, as I said, with the other dominations, what is called, the other Jewish streams in America. And in his yeshiva, it's pure Torah. which in the beginning was difficult. It's a difficult sell to the American public, but when it began, it gave the students there a pride, a sense of belonging. I mean, they have a very certain worldview. They are not confused as all the others. And sometimes you need only a small amount, but very strong believers in order to grow something. And that's exactly what he was able to establish there. He also said in some of his sichot, that's very interesting, he said that in a place which is very materialistic, it is maybe that's contra what we would naturally assume, but it's very easy to sell spirituality because there is a hunger. And maybe people are not aware to this hunger, but if you just have them smell spirituality and Torah, they would understand something is lacking in their life. So he said that was the potential that he was building on. Now, in the yeshiva, he was very hardliner. In other areas, he understood that he needs also to be pragmatic in order to establish the Jewish life, the Orthodox Jewish life, the Haredi Orthodox Jewish life in America. And so he was also the head of Torah Umesora for schools, Jewish day schools, because again, even Orthodox parents would send their children to public schools. That was, for him, that was an abomination. So he worked for the establishing of Torah Umesora schools everywhere that he could, although some of them also taught secular, some of them were co-ed, something that for him was obviously, again, that's unthinkable. But if that is what is needed now, then that would be done. Not in his yeshiva. His yeshiva is pure. It's the Tevat Noach. It's in the desert, that's the oasis. But in other places, you need somehow to sustain the Jewish life in order for them to be able to come to his yeshiva and become real Jewish participants. And so he establishes the Torah Mesora school network. He also is the leading figure in Moetzes, in the rabbinical board of the Aguda in the United States, and makes many decisions as the head there. He is also very important in the establishing of the Chinuch HaAtzmai here in Eretz Israel, because of the importance of Chinuch. He says people make Aliyah to Eretz Israel, and their children are being sent into the Mamlachti, right, into the public system of Israel. Even the Dati Mamlachti for him was not good enough. So you need a Haredi school system. How would you have a Haredi school system? So he raised funds in the United States, and that's how they began the Chinuch HaAtzmai. By the way, that's my personal connection. I also learned in a Chinuch HaAtzmai day school until my 6th grade. So in a way, I'm in debt also to Rav Aharon Kotler in a more direct way. So he helped very much to raise the needed funds and to head this initiative. Now you can understand some people would oppose such a thing because they would say you are creating different camps in Israel. Instead of having everyone under the state, you are creating a separate camp. He would say that's what I want to do, right? Because I believe in the Tevat Noach model. However, he opposed the Satmar Rebbe, and he said that Haredi Jews must participate in the Bchirot, in voting to the Knesset. He said there is no other way, because otherwise we would not be able to sustain our ideas and existence here in Israel. And that's how, I don't know how many Jews here in Israel went out to vote, because Aharon Kotler in America said they should vote. I guess that the Chazon Ish was much more important in this regard. But nonetheless, that was his position. They also asked for his advice if the Aguda, you have to know, he also advised the Aguda to run with the Mizrahi. In the first election, they had the Chazita Meuchedet, the Chazita Datita Meuchedet, the United Religious Front. They all ran together, and he gave his approval for that, although he was extremely against sitting with modern Orthodox in the United States. But here in Israel, he felt that's the only way that the Haredi world can be.
The kids go to this yeshiva.
In the United States?
Yeah.
I think immediately after high school.
but they would have had other schools.
Yeah, they would learn in Chaim Berlin or in Torah Vadat, and then you would accept them. Yeah. Afterwards, they established nowadays they have their own system, and they don't use anymore the modern Orthodox system. But in the beginning, they were using the modern Orthodox system for the children, and only in the yeshiva they went to Lakewood.
So Body World slotted into this.
That's right. In a sense, also get that's right. We need Bezrat Hashem also to speak about them, of course. He was niftar in 1962, and he's buried here in Har HaMenuchot in Yerushalayim. Nowadays, the Lakewood Yeshiva is somewhere between 7,000 to 9,000 students. This small institution of 13, 14 students, nowadays between 7,000 to 9,000, depends how exactly do you count, which students, part-time, etc. But these are the numbers we speak about. It's the second largest yeshiva in the world. The first is, of course, the Mir here in Yerushalayim. It is obviously a lighthouse and the powerhouse for all of the United States. I mean, I was in Toronto. They had a huge Lakewood Kollel in Toronto, headed by Rav Shlomo Miller, who was, I think he is, I'm not sure, I think he's still alive, a very important posek from Lakewood. The students are everywhere. And with this mindset, by the way, I sat once in a dinner for a Lakewood Kollel, not in Toronto, in somewhere else. They invited us, and we went there. And the speaker came in, and he said how before the Lakewood Kollel came to the city, where it was a desert. Obviously, he was quoting Rav Kotler. Now, the guy sitting next to me in the table in the dinner, he said, how can he say such a thing? We had the Jewish day school, we had the Rov, we had the Shul. How can you say it was a desert? But we have to understand, for these people, if you don't have a yeshiva in the Kollel, you are a nothing. Even if you have 1 million, you can have 5,000 Jews with a school and everything. You don't have a high learning system, yeshiva of Torah, then that's the desolation. Exactly. That's the way they see it, and it's very strong. It's very strong. Now, again, you can look it more kindly or not, but it's a very black and white system which help develop it. His family, as I said, he had a son and a daughter. His son, Rav Shneur, became the Rosh Yeshiva after the passing of his father. Obviously, he continued his legacy. The yeshiva continued to grow. And nowadays, it's Rav Malkiel, who is the grandson of Malkiel Kotler, the grandson of Rav Aharon Kotler, who was the head of the lake. I mean, they have now, I think, 4 or 5 heads. It's a huge place. You can't have one man running the whole show. So I think they have now 4 or 5 Rashi Yeshiva adding the place. His books are being printed most after his death. They took his writings, so his son established a machon for the printing of his farim called Mishnat Rabbi Aharon. And it's Torah, it's halacha, it's chidushim. He has there about gelatin. He was one of the poskim that was machmir about gelatin. And many other, of course, mechitza in shul. So everything else that you can imagine in the American world of the 20th century is there. He was a genius. I would say the truth, it's very difficult to read Shuvot. Is all over the place. I mean, he's a genius. You need to sit very, very, very sharp in order to understand what he writes. And to a large degree, the Haredi world today in the United States, which is Baruch Hashem B'Ayin Hara, is growing in huge, right, in frog lips. So they are made in his image in many, many ways. Of course, there are other people who spoke about Rav Yaakov Kaminetsky. There are others that were important, but he was an extremely central player in the growth of the Haredi world in the United States, and also, as I said, also had an important influence here in Eretz Israel. And you can agree or disagree with some of his ways, but you cannot but admire the figure that is being reflected from this life journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was very
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is